Welcome back to this episode of Dear Frannie. I am joined by Will Fraker and Alex Russo, two of my favorite marketers in franchising right now. I'm Catherine LeBlanc, your host of Dear Frannie and a fractional chief marketing officer and the founder of Franchise Fractionals. I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves before we jump into this episode. Will, why don't you go first?
Hey, Catherine, thanks for having us. I appreciate it. I'm Will Fraker. I'm the VP of Brand and Performance Marketing at Feed Store. I've been in the franchising space for the last 10 years or so, and I've actually had a unique opportunity to work both on the agency side, working specifically franchise marketing there, and now for the last several years on the client side. So I'm excited to be here today.
Awesome. Alex, tell us more about you.
All right. Well, first off, I'll echo Will. Thank you so much for having me and us on. I'm very excited. I am Alex Russo. I am a fractional CMO, and I have been in the franchising space for 5 years. I've been in strategic comms for 10 years, as in a design agency, then an actual advertising agency before making the move over to franchising.
Awesome. This is the perfect group to tackle today's question. But before we get to that, I'm going to ask you guys about your hot takes. So this is one of my favorite segments that we do here at Dear Frannie. And I am going to start with Will.
Okay, I love a good hot take. So I actually was writing all these down. Like I could say this one, I could say this one. So one of the things that for me, spending a lot of time on the agency side, doing a lot of advertising, that I felt like was always missed and never really understood, even sometimes by marketers themselves, was if you don't have a strong SEO strategy, you're actually wasting your advertising dollars. That's my hot take. If you focus on your organic and your SEO presence, then you're probably wasting your marketing advertising dollars. So should I take a second to explain that and to break that down, my perspective there?
Yes, because
Okay.
I think it's
So
super smart.
the
Yeah.
the idea here, the idea for me, when I first thought about this is I thought they were two separate buckets. Most people do. Okay, I have my organic presence or what I'm doing from a content perspective, how I'm really laying out my SEO strategy, and then totally separate and completely unrelated is my advertising. And that is totally wrong because one feeds the other. If you're not thinking about how to drive SEO and organic performance, then your advertising dollars are going to be more expensive. You're going to end up paying more for every click or every visitor that you drive to your website. And you're not actually supporting those advertising dollars and those messages that you're putting through those dollars well enough to actually see substantial conversions over time. You can always tell when a location is spending too much on advertising because it makes up a high percentage of their overall leads or traffic volume. And you don't want that. Over time, you want to see more of your organic growth or more of your growth come from organic channels. And so if you're not really focusing in on your organic or SEO strategy, then your advertised dollars are just going to get more and more expensive and you're going to end up wasting so much. So that's my hot take. Not everyone agrees, but
No,
I think it's a really important thing for us to focus on.
Yes, I totally love it because and this is a struggle that I'm having in franchising, and we know this, the franchisees, the dollars that they want to spend on transactional activities. And so when we think about digital media for that transactional activity, they want to place a Facebook ad and see that Facebook ad went all the way through to conversion, which is fine. And that is an appropriate way to spend your ad dollars. But when we're not able to back that up with an organic strategy, it becomes exactly what you just said, too heavy on the digital media side. Now, the challenge that I have is how do you sell in that SEO strategy first with with franchisees who do not want to wait, right? They don't want any long-term. I guess it's hard to explain what the long-term benefits are going to be. And then on the flip side, the SEO is, a little bit of an art, right? You have to constantly maintain it. It's like a garden. You have to kind of groom it and grow it. And that those returns, you don't see the $1,000 you invested this month until 6 months, a year later. And so it's hard to create the sell-in on this is why it's important to invest in.
Yeah, you could be correct on that. And that's why a lot of times us as marketers can be really difficult on top of the other reasons that it's really difficult because we have to help them understand that there's this dollars today, dollars tomorrow thought process what they're doing. And the thing is that it's kind of the same thing with our own lives. Personally, I think people in general aren't really good at thinking about 60 years from now, but good about thinking about later today. What am I going to eat later today? But not how am I creating the diet that I want to reach my goals, let's say. Same thing with the marketing side of it. Oftentimes, franchisees want to make money as fast as they can, so they'll pour in dollars and expect instant return to come through. And while it's important to have a good advertising strategy and a healthy budget, if in 6 months from now you're still spending that exact same amount of money and still that makes the highest share of your overall traffic or leads or whatever your KPI is, you haven't done enough to really sustain that. And I found all the time on the agency side, we would get locations started up, and yes, budgets would be high in the beginning. We would see a lot of direct dollars come from those advertising spends. But then 6 months later, a year later, with the right SEO strategy, those budgets could be spent more efficiently in other ways because organically, the majority of their leads were coming from content on the site or showing up first on Google or having a good listing strategy. And so it's really important to help them focus in on that. And a lot of times telling that story is really, really effective, showing them why paying attention to those elements can really help them ultimately save money in the future. I also think, and last thing, I want to turn it over to our other hot take here. But another thing I think is really critical to pay attention to is when you bucket them separately, you don't get the interaction between them. Someone doesn't just see an ad and go, "Oh, well, I'll do it right away. I'm going to just go on that ad and convert right away." That ad is an influence on that person's decision-making process. Can they actually click through that ad, the last click, and actually make the purchase? Of course they can. We see it all the time. But what's often happening, if you think about it from your own perspective as a buyer, you're seeing that and go, "Oh, that's really interesting. I'll go look at that. Let me Google them. Let me do a little bit of research." And you don't make that purchase for another day or two or week, depending on, what that purchase is. So we really need to think about them as intertwined. I think that's the best way to approach it.
I could not agree more. I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to franchisees or even franchisors, when they're thinking through digital marketing, they just kind of forget their own habits. They forget what they do. And when they're sitting there and they're clicking through things, they just kind of expect these, prospects, these kind of shadowy figures are just sitting there kind of like Sims and just doing
Mhm.
exactly what they want them to do because they so badly want that conversion and they so badly want them to behave exactly how, in this perfect flow. That's not how it works. And so
Right.
to your point, I think everybody would be more profitable if your hot take were not a hot take, but just a standard understanding and practice. Um, because you can say so many times your organic social or SEO, that's your billboard. People are going there for validation to just kind of prove it. And I've heard so many times, well, I don't post on social because I don't see the return.
Mhm.
Sometimes I can't show you it right now, but there is a return. It is important. Think of your own behavior. So I'm looking forward to when that's not a hot take.
Me too.
All right, Alex, what you got for us today?
Sure. So my hot take, and Catherine knows I have many. So I feel the same. I had a long list. I could do a whole podcast of just my own hot takes, but I would say that brands are so focused on collecting leads that sometimes they stunt their own conversions. And I feel like I hear a lot and I see a lot as a consumer. I'll go on to what I know is a franchise's website. I am trying to book an appointment and it's just desperate for me to enter my information and I know what they're doing. But there's nowhere for me to just book online quickly. It's constantly wanting me to get in this flow. I find that really frustrating. I have dropped out of the process myself as a consumer because I wanted to, spend my money there and then, and I wasn't able to. And it's very interesting to me that brands are so focused on this and that they're so into collecting the lead form at all of the points, especially like they get it confused, in my opinion, my hot take. Very often they're collecting leads when they should be collecting conversions. There are other places that you can get that information, get them into the flow, but too often they're confusing them. And in the same breath, I will hear franchisors talking about, we need these leads, we need the franchisees to be working them. And then 30 seconds later, Well, these are people who have never really had to do sales calls before. You know, they are former accountants. They don't really know how to nurture the lead. Then why are you putting all of your eggs into that basket and having them to be salespeople? It's just a convoluted funnel when it really doesn't need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that flows perfectly into what Will's hot take was, right? Like, what
Yes.
is your digital footprint? What is your digital ecosystem? And it all works together. And to your point, there's a time for conversion and then a time for a lead, you know,
Right.
and I think that, you know, what I have observed is that we have really discounted that consideration time frame in the
Yes.
customer journey. And that's where, you know, if they're ready to purchase, they are ready to purchase. Don't stand in their way. But if
Right.
they're still in the consideration phase, have you built out the ecosystem that's necessary to bring them into purchase? And so I think, to your point, being thoughtful about where to convert versus where to fill a form is essential.
Yes,
I
exactly.
love what you said. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, no, just agreeing with my own point.
That was a really good idea. I actually, I mean, I agree what you're saying totally, and I had actually more of a thought about the second thing you said, or what it relates to, which is they're so concerned about the lead that they're missing out on the conversion. I almost took that in an operational set or
Mm,
mindset. Like, one of the things that marketing gets tasked with all the time is I need more leads. And they're not thinking about how well are we converting those leads. Like you had said,
Mhm.
Alex, about like what kind of follow-up are we doing, or who's answering phones, or what kind of operational training are we giving these folks so that when the lead comes in, they're spending more money, or they're getting that lead actually booked. It's a service-based business or something like that. I took
mhm.
it that way, and I think, and whether or not you meant it that way, I think that could be another hot take altogether. I think it makes total sense because marketing's just like, well, we just need more, we just need more, we just need more. And meanwhile, operations is over here going, well, I've got a 20% conversion rate. Instead, it should be 60% or 70%. Marketing can't solve that problem by just dumping more leads into a poor funnel. So I mean, on multiple levels, I think your hot take here is spot on there. Definitely needs to be something that brands focus in on.
And something to add to your point there about like the more leads, more leads, more leads. That all I find that frustrating because okay, so let's say you work on a lead for and it's all over the place, right? I feel like in most organizations, some people really working them, some owners, some not. There's not really like an overarching method to lead nurture. Um, so if they don't convert within 30 days, what's happening to that lead? They're just sitting there.
Mhm.
When meanwhile, it doesn't mean that they're not interested. Maybe they put their name in the pot so that they would continue to get reminders for when they're ready to convert. That could be 60, 90 days from now.
Yeah.
But it's very, few and far between that brands are building out their nurture cycles, flows, whatever, to capture that longer timeline. I
Yes.
see that consistently with products, like direct to consumer product nurture. Every
Mhm.
text or
Yeah.
email thing that I'm in, they have it spot on. And it's very rare that a franchise is mimicking that right now.
Yep, I agree. Okay, my hot take is a bit different. I read an article about Taco Bell, and so my hot take is it's okay to be the value brand. And I think that founders and CEOs really get hung up on being the best, being premier, being a step above. And what gets lost is, there is room to be a value brand. And if that's your positioning, it's okay to embrace it. And there's ways to embrace it in ways that, doesn't make you a coupon cutter or doesn't make you feel cheap. It still, has a high value to the person who's your end user. But it's okay not to be premium, and it's okay to be the value brand. And the article I was reading was about how Taco Bell is really thriving in a time where restaurants are not. And the consumer demand and traffic is really going down across the board. But that value proposition is still really valuable and is still driving traffic to those locations. So that's my hot take. It's okay to be the value brand sometimes.
I think
I
that's a great
love it.
point.
Yeah, it's a great hot. I personally think there's too many artisan everythings out
Yes.
there. Walked by, I was in Del Mar, our headquarters is in Del Mar, and I was walking down the street and there's this like artisan ice cream shop, And I was like, why does everything have to be? I think what it is, honestly, is they want a reason to charge more for their product or service, but not necessarily because it is itself artisan or special in any way. It's like the same thing. I think brands do this to their detriment. They don't understand who the audience is. And honestly, I love Rite Aid ice cream just as much as I probably love that artisanal ice cream. I think it's overused. I definitely love the Tonic. I think that's a fantastic one.
And I think it's also a way for brands to give themselves something else to talk about when talking about themselves, because they're kind of stuck in like, well, we make ice cream. And so then they're like, well, how do we make that more exciting? Oh, it's artisanal ice cream. It's hand churned. And it's just more talking points versus finding something else like Taco Bell. They have a phenomenal kind of just societal presence now because of their marketing, but they didn't try to make the food fancy. They leaned into that actually like high schoolers love it. People love getting it late night. Like they've leaned into that and played that up versus trying to make up other talking points about themselves.
Well, and they did, they're just a great case study in so many different ways, but they did try the artisanal route, right? And they paired it with their value menu. And this was years ago, and it didn't work. And so they pulled it back, and they've really just leaned in on, we're going to be cheap food for you. Come get it. And it's hot and it's available at all times. So I think, I work with a lot of food brands, and a lot of food brands, like to your point, want to be premium, and there's only so much room at the top for that. So knowing your position.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, time to jump into our question. But first, I have a little bit of a commercial from our sponsor, Franchise Fractionals. Dear Frannie is brought to you by Franchise Fractionals. Scaling your franchise doesn't mean going it alone. With Franchise Fractionals, you have access to the top tier talent you need when you need it. From finance to operations and marketing, our fractional executives have been where you want to go. Don't let the full-time commitment of executive roles hold you back. Visit franchisefractionals.com today to discover how our leaders can help pave the way for your franchise's success. Because here at Dear Frannie, we're all about bringing you insights that matter and leadership that drives growth. So thanks, Franchise Fractionals. Okay, digging into our question, which again, I think this panel is just perfectly poised to answer. How do you find the right vendor partner? I get bombarded by solicitations. I am overwhelmed by choice when it comes to choosing the right vendor for almost anything. Are there any tips or tricks to finding the partner that is right for you? So Will started us off with our hot take. So I'm going to have Alex start us off with an answer to this question.
Sure. So as somebody who had to reconfigure their inbox multiple times to try and send me the flow of these emails, I feel this one personally. I think when it comes to finding the right vendor, there's a few things that have to happen before you even get to that point. And it's a lot of expectation setting and conversations that have to be had, and everybody has to kind of come into agreement about, and then you go off and you start having your conversation. So I think with all things digital, or honestly marketing, but especially this, what are your expectations and what are your goals? Why are you bringing on another vendor? What was the problem with the last one? Is it an actual problem that cannot be solved? Or is it one franchisee is upset or a couple franchisees are upset? And then you got to dig in, well, what's going on there? Is that the agency, or is there something that you could help kind of bridge in that relationship? But then when it comes to expectation, like, are you adding one because you want a suite of preferred digital partners? What is going to be good for your organization? What is going to make it so that when you go through this process, and it is a long process onboarding a new vendor, if you're doing a pilot and, there's so many calls and hours put into it, what is going to be good and what is going to be bad? And then when it comes to finding the right one, again, what offerings are you looking for? Are you, what type of ad sets? Because there are some that are kind of limited, some who come in and they offer the world and they're charging for, email campaigns, which maybe you want, but again, you have to figure out why you're using it. If it can even, I've had conversations where somebody's kind of gone in pretty deep and then realized that they don't have the capability of, merging their email platform with that email. Like, it's not possible. And then, so after you've set your goals and your expectations and you figured out what type of ads they're running, I think then there's now this added layer, which is exciting. Is it a kind of a true digital agency, or is it the more AI based and the more, as an owner, you're able to go in, you select the ads that you want, you put in your own budget, and it's kind of run on its own. And then honestly, this is kind of like being blunt. I have learned to just start asking other marketers for their recommendations, because there are so many. And if I put it on LinkedIn, I'm going to get, overwhelmed. And so hearing the pros and cons of other vendors from somebody that I know and trust goes a long way. It's like, the power of any recommendation. So long-winded answer. I think before you can select one, you have to understand why you're selecting one.
Mm-hmm. Will, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I definitely agree with everything Alex said. I think you should, that last point about asking fellow marketers. Honestly, if you're not doing that, you're probably not doing your job as a leader, because
Yeah.
you don't need to carve out this path on your own. Hey, did you know I found this vendor you've never heard of? They're fantastic. You could, but that's going to take a lot of time and effort. I mean, those are things that we have in short supply and need to be focused in on other things with. So I think utilizing your network is key. Just a small point on that. I totally agree with that point. I think you should start there. That shouldn't be the last thing you do. I think you should start with it. When selecting a vendor, I definitely would agree with Alex when she talked about how you got to know what you're looking for. Right away, the things that I look for when I get into an organization, to a franchise system, the things that I'm looking for are, what do I need that vendor to accomplish?
Mhm.
And the big thing for me right away is, do I need corporate support? Do I need somebody who can run national programs well? Do I need creative development? Do I need to manage listings or reviews?
Mhm.
Those are key questions that I think will help take the amount of vendors or partners that are out there down to a select few. And then another question that I ask is, do I need them to provide franchisee support?
Mhm.
That's another big question, because it narrows that pool down even smaller. So I would start with the key questions for you as the brand that define what success looks like. That'll often take this massive overrun industry of digital vendors and narrow it down to, okay, I've got 10. Right. And then you're talking to your partners or your other CMOs that you're working with, and that'll narrow it down to 5. And then, okay, you RP for those 5 and go from there. I think it's important to pay attention to what is going to drive success for you, what you know that you need in the future. I think we should keep an eye on how you're expecting to grow. So one of the things that we're paying attention to, we'll have 45 more stores coming in by the end of the year. And so what do I need to pay attention to if we're going to hit those numbers? I need a vendor that can scale with us. I'm paying attention to things like, what's their advertising markup if I bring my franchisee on to use them? Do I need to have more than one agency of record to give them options and choice? So there's a lot of these things that it does take a lot of effort and energy to work through. I think if you start with what's going to drive the most success, what you need it for operationally, I think that really helps it narrow down to a handful of vendors that you then can get through the process with.
I think both of what you guys are saying, and put a different way, is you have to start with the requirements. So before you even know you need a digital vendor, or if you need a vendor at all, you have to say, what problem am I trying to solve? And what are the 5 major things that need to go into this problem? So for example, even if it's, outside of marketing, let's say you want to bring on a new inventory platform or some other operations platform. Well, first you have to start with your POS, right? So what POS am I using? Do they need to integrate? What do they need to do? What are my requirements before you go talk to vendors? Because I think one of the chords this question struck with me, and I know we've all been on the receiving end of this, is your founder or your CEO gets a solicitation email. It's super pretty and talks about an awesome case study where they solved all of the problems for this one group. and now they want to solve all of your problems. And so as the person working for the CEO, you get this email and you're like, wait, I didn't know we had this problem, number one. Number two, well, okay, if I'm going to go down this path with this vendor, and now I've got to go find 2 other vendors to compare them against, and then go through this whole process for a problem I didn't even know existed. And so I think, making sure that you have those problems identified by the leadership team, and then the requirements to solve the problem before you go to vendors is just, I think, key to having someone successful and having someone that is going to be with you long term. One question I have for you guys is, how much do you value franchise experience in your vendors? Because for me, one thing that I've noticed, or sometimes I have, really experienced franchise vendors, sometimes I don't. And I think that goes back to, do I need franchisee support? Is this franchisee facing? Is this something that's just going to be at the corporate level? But I have found that, more and more, I'm really valuing the idea that a vendor is going to be kind of in this fight with me, not fight, but like in the trenches with me, building this platform and knowing, 3 steps ahead, like we have to, of, okay, well, these are the exception. I'm going to have franchisees that want to use it this way. I'm going to have franchisees that want to use it this way. So how do I work through all of that? I'm finding that I value that more heavier than I maybe did a couple of years ago. And I'm curious to see what you guys think about that.
Alex, do you want to start?
Sure. I didn't think it would matter to me, and I have learned that it does matter to me, because it saves me time, quite honestly. Like, if somebody hasn't worked with a franchise brand, it's so different and unique, and there are a lot of little kind of extra layers to it that I find, if they haven't worked with the franchise brand, then I'm the educator. Mm-hmm. And I'm the one having to explain everything. And then sometimes it's like, oh, I forgot about this other part. Versus if somebody comes in with the knowledge of how it works, and honestly, just like the framework of how it works, that alone solves a lot of the issues. So yeah, to me, it is important. They don't have to only be franchise focused, but having that depth of knowledge, I think just makes for an easier partnership.
Yeah, I think this is essential, and I think what I would say to not just be an agreeing voice with the rest of you, because I think you're spot on, both of you, is that it does depend on what it is that you're looking for. Does your POS company need to have franchise experience? Maybe, maybe not. Does your technical team or platform? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I think that what we have to identify, what are those unique things about franchising that make this job exciting, is the positive inflection I'll give to this. Challenging, exciting, there's a lot of opportunity with it. I think that those are the things that it makes so much sense to partner with somebody that already understands the model of franchising. And one just clear example here, again, because of my experience, is the marketing side. When I can work with a marketing vendor who understands that we're not just making changes from the top down, I have to go and I have to show that creative or those campaigns or the budgets or the reporting to franchisee level folks, or thinking about the advertising councils that we work with at the franchise level, right? They're usually the ones funding it. So there's just this extra layer where I think when it matters, it really matters. And so I definitely agree. I would prefer it. I usually love to work with vendors who already understand our space, because we can move more quickly than we would if someone's like, I don't understand. Why do you have to have this reviewed by your franchisees? And you're like, okay, yeah, because it's
how long you got?
It's how this business works.
Right.
I think it's definitely.
So I'm as we're talking, I'm kind of ticking off some things that are must-haves for me when I'm working with a new vendor, and so I'm going to ask you for yours too. But I'll start so that I give you a second to think about. But enterprise level reporting is something that is often not talked about in the discovery process. because it's an assumption. You cannot assume that any vendor you're bringing to the table has the capability to give you enterprise level reporting. And what I mean by enterprise level reporting, it's a roll up. So each individual franchisee needs to be able to see what's happening in their location, regardless of the vendor that you have. And then you need to see from a franchisor perspective what's happening across the board. That's called enterprise level reporting. And so for any system that you bring on, you're going to want them to have location specific reporting, and you're going to want to have enterprise level reporting, and it needs to work together. And that's not something you want them to build on your dime. Number two would be the ability to bill franchisees. You do not want, if they can bill franchisees directly, that cuts you out as the middleman. It does not feel like a fee to the franchisees. It feels like they are paying for a service and they're receiving it. And that is not something that a lot of organizations can manage. You know, billing 300 people versus one person is a lot harder. So if they have the ability to bill franchisees individually, that's a big plus for me when looking at vendors. And I think the other kind of intangible is, you know, someone who's willing to go be on your team with the franchisees and be on the franchisees team. I can't tell you how many partners I've worked with that really know and feel what the franchisees are going through, and they bring that to the conversations that they're having with me, and I get to bring that, they get to bring my perspective back to the franchisee. And so you never want your vendor to be a middleman, but you certainly want them to have empathy and sympathy for both sides of the business, because that's what's going to ultimately make them successful and make you successful. So those would be my three kind of look out for these when choosing a vendor. Will, do you have three or two or one?
Yeah, three. Okay. I'll start with this one and see if I can come up with more as I go. I loved your point though, and I'll emphasize it about the support person or the partner that you have. I think you're going to be so successful if you find somebody who almost embodies the brand as we do as the leaders in the organization, because then they can have these conversations in a much more effective way with their franchisees. So I would say whether you're using a franchise vendor or not, if that partner can step into the shoes of a franchisee and really understand that, I think that that's a must have for sure. So I really like that point. One thing that I think would be fantastic to be able to find, and something that you don't find very often, is to be able to have a vendor who understands the tech stack for a franchise system. They can really help them execute on things. Let me give you an example of that. You could manage your listings by yourself, right? You could have all your GMBs for every single one of your locations, and Google gives the ability to make those changes. Or you could partner with, and there's several vendors that do this, but I'll just name Yext as one of the most common that can do this through automation. And so having those kinds of features, I think, are absolutely essential when managing a franchise system well, because instead of something that takes, maybe one of your people an entire day to make several changes, this can be updated through automation. So finding vendors that have those capabilities, I think, is absolutely critical. I have found some of the the most effective vendors that I've worked with have good website management. This is another thing that's often overlooked and honestly seldom done. So this is like, I'm talking probably like 4 or 5 people that I know in this industry that can do that. But if you want to give franchisees access to make changes like hours on their site, maybe a picture on their local page, maybe it's sharing social images from a job that they just did. There are vendors out there who can give you those capabilities. So that'd be more of a nice one, because I don't think it's essential in running a franchise system well. But if you can find a partner that gives your franchisees the right kind of access to certain things like that, it makes your job easier. You can spend your time on things that are more focused.
Yes, love that. Know what roles are available to you in the beginning when you're working with someone. Alex, what do you think? What are your tops for vendors?
Can I give a red flag? Because I feel like you guys have come up with a lot of solid ones that I'm kind of struggling to think of an additional one, but I know one that drove me insane. And it was that the vendor was insistent on the creative that we make, the captions that we use, the words that we use for meta ads. There's a method, like they didn't want corporate to give any input. Or if we'd be like, here, run this caption for this campaign, and they would take it and they would change it and they would add to it. They put all these emojis. We'd be like, that's not what we want. That is not remotely part of this. And they just were like, this is how we do it. This is how we do business. So I feel like a red flag is if they say our method is the method. Now, obviously you are looking for their professional input, but if they're at the risk of going off brand or not being able to actually conform into a campaign that we are really trying to test to see how it performs as it was built and strategized, that's a big red flag.
Yeah, you want vendors who are
Totally.
going to work with you, not
Yes.
fight you. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Awesome. Okay, well, I think this was a fantastic learning for vendors and franchisors alike. So if you're a vendor and you want more hot takes on how to be a better partner to franchise brands, hit us up. But thank you guys so much for your time today and for joining us for this episode of Dear Frannie. We will talk to you guys at another time.
Thank you guys so
Thanks
much.
for having us on.